Good afternoon, Bill Wiggin MP.
Try that. Is that working?
That's working well. Welcome to the CraftCon 2021 Cider Conference. Thank you for joining us. We have already on the panel here Barry Watts from the Small Independent Brewers Association, and
Hi,
Gordon Johncox, who I think you already know.
Yeah, we do. Hello, Bill.
Hello.
And we're still waiting for your colleague, Mr. Ian Littlegranger.
Right. Yes, it took a little while breaking into the session, but I got there in the end, so thank you very much indeed.
Well done, and thank you for your persistence. It's like all of these new things, it does take a little while just to kind of get your head around it, doesn't it? And
I think we've got 28 people watching. Is that right? Does that sound right to you?
That is correct.
Excellent. We don't want to keep them waiting too long. I'm sure
no, well, I'm just. If Ian is on his way, then perhaps we should just press on. So I will give you a quick outline of what we propose to do. I'm Tom Tibbets. I will be chairing this session, and I want to just do a quick 5 slides on the current status of cider duty, cider and perry duty in the UK, just to bring the audience entirely up to speed, and then give our view as an association on how the current alcohol structures review could be used to coerce cider into a more potential position for the future, shall I say. And then, of course, we will go to the panelists, and that's really why you're here, and I hope very much that we can hear opinions and proposals and solutions and answers to questions. I would also remind the audience that if they want to ask a question, it's very helpful if they can put their questions in the Q&A column on the right-hand side of the screen, and then I can put those questions to the panelists. So don't be shy. And without further ado, I think we shall crack on, and I will admit Ian Littlegranger when he arrives. So yes, the session is entitled Striving for Sustainability in the Business of Cider, the Case for Duty Reform. And so you may or may not be aware that cider has been manufactured in the UK since the early 1600s, and that's also pretty much when the taxation of it began, back in 1643. There was famously, during the 7 Years' War, there was a fairly large cider levy imposed on cider makers of 4 shillings per hogshead. In modern money, that's 20 pence per 50-gallon barrel, which was a lot in those days. and since then, cider has been variously taxed and untaxed, but interestingly, since 1830, cider has only spent a total of 52 out of 190 or so years being taxed. So just over a quarter of the last 200 years, cider has had tax levied on it. And of course, since 1976, we have had cider duty following our accession to the European Economic Community. But it is worth noting that the minimum duty rate that the European Union presently requires cider to be taxed at is precisely €0 per litre. And one of the other reasons why we're here today is because there is currently an alcohol duty structures review underway, and we have contributed to it, and I'm sure many other on this call have too. The current cider and duty perry structure is quite simple. Like wine, it's taxed per litre produced, regardless of the alcohol content, and that's simply because, like grapes, apples have seasonal variability in their harvest. How much sugar they produce depends not on a recipe, but on how much sunshine and rain and so on, other climatic factors like this. As almost all cider makers know, cider makers currently enjoy a 70 hectolitre exemption of duty liability, which means if they produce less than 70 hectolitres, they do not have to pay duty. However, if they produce even 70.01 hectolitres in any 12-month rolling period, that renders the maker liable to pay duty on the entire production at the standard rate. There is no discounted rate. And the current rates of duty can be seen at the bottom of the screen there. The lowest rate of duty is 40 pence per litre for a low-strength still or low-strength sparkling cider, but that rapidly rises as you increase either the carbon dioxide content of the cider and make it sparkling, when it goes up to £2.88 per litre, or in the case of very strong still cider, 61 61 pence per litre. And because France is almost closer to me than Edinburgh, I always like to take the French cider making duty system as a comparator, since France is the second or third biggest cider manufacturer in the world after the UK. And in France, they have a different system. They levy just 1.36 euro cents per litre, but that is on all cider produced. The other thing about cider that's worth noting in this debate is that how it's defined from a taxation point of view by HMRC. Wine is defined by HMRC as a drink that is made solely from the juice of grapes. You are allowed to add certain things like sugars and sulfur dioxide and other things like that, but the dilution of the must is not permitted. Then it changes from being wine into something known as made wine. Cider, however, can be made with as little as only 35% apple juice and be made up of 65% water and still qualify to be called cider. And it's also worth noting there is no such thing as made cider in the same way that there is a made wine from the taxation point of view. And both drinks are taxed not on the unitary basis, that's wrong, but on the banded per litre basis. And that's partly because apples and grapes are a seasonal product. They come only once a year. They cannot be easily stored. And that is why we don't have to pay per unit of alcohol. If you're a business in the cider business in the UK and you make less than 7,000 litres of cider, so as you know, we don't pay any duty at that level of production. However, if you do increase your production beyond that level, you have a significant amount of duty to pay. If you're a sparkling cider maker, increasing your production from 7,000 to 7,001 litres per annum will land you with a bill for over £20,000. And again, that compares rather unfavorably with the same sized business in France, who at about 7,000 litres would have a total bill of duty to pay of about €100, which is £86 or so. In 2018, the TCCPA undertook a brief survey of its members. We'll be doing so again this year. And in this particular question, we asked our cider makers to supply not only when they started making cider, but also the volume they produced in that year in 2017 in litres. So that's what each dot is: a cider maker with an appropriate literage up the left-hand column. Note it's a logarithmic scale, and when they were founded along the bottom there. And you can see there's a lot of commercial activity in the last 20 years in cider makers. There's lots of new cider makers as well. But the red line is the £7,000 duty limit. And the colours of the dots I'd like to draw your attention to. If you're above the cider duty limit of 7,000 litres per annum production, you'll see the dots are almost all orange or purple. And that indicates that those cider makers intend to either increase their production or make no real change to their production. However, below the red line, which is this 7,000 litre duty limit, the cider makers are much more likely to either make no real change, or the green dot, which is increased production, but stay below the 7,000 litres per annum production level. So I think that particular bit of data from our survey demonstrates nicely that the 7,000 litre duty exemption, whilst being a wonderful thing for nascent cider makers to get themselves off to a good start, it does actually end up being a commercial break and being a challenge to overcome when you're trying to expand your business and employ more people and send more money to the exchequer. So finally, our response at the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association to the duty review was that we would propose that there is a new definition of cider to include pure juice seasonal cider, or seasonal pure juice cider, which is effectively cider where you take apples, you press them once a year, you do not intentionally dilute that apple juice, and you make cider with that apple juice in the traditional manner. And we think if you include that definition of cider, or enhance cider's definition to include that, and then introduce a made cider definition, which means that if you want to add sugar or flavorings or any other thing, you can do that, but it has a slightly different duty treatment. That would be a fairer way of protecting traditional cider makers. We also believe that we should retain the 70 hectolitre exemption, reflecting the fact we're a seasonal product. And it actually costs quite a lot to make a seasonal product, with the working capital being tied up for a whole year all the time. We would propose a tapered small producer relief, much like the Brewers. So if you go over the 70 hectolitre production limit, you don't immediately get clobbered by an enormous duty bill. It's perhaps a duty bill that is halved and would be tapered as your production volumes increase. And that, as we will see, and I hopefully hear from Barry, has done wonders for the craft beer industry in the last 20 or so years. There's one other thing we think is quite absurd, which is that sparkling cider duty is 7 times higher per litre than a still cider of the same strength. And I cannot, for the life of me, see why a sparkling cider could be conceived as being 7 times more harmful or more insidious to society than a still cider, and therefore why it should be taxed at such a much higher level. And there is also the confusion in the cider industry about the fact that if you add hops to cider, it becomes a wine from the perspective of the duty administrators. But if you add apples to beer, it remains a beer. So yes, this business of made wine and made cider and what adjuncts to cider should and should not be allowed, if you can still call it cider. And yes, this really is the final slide, something to look to the future on. If we can get the duty system for our new cider industry in the UK right, we can increase the tax revenue to the exchequer, which can surely only be a good thing. We can create demand for orchard products. As some of you may be aware, orchards certainly around here in Herefordshire are being grubbed up, even today, in spite of the sort of boom in craft cider that we're experiencing. By creating that demand for orchard products, we improve our biodiversity, we can improve our farm diversification. We can, of course, create new export opportunities. British cider is, in fact, world-renowned. We are the largest world producer of cider. And finally, of course, creating jobs and opportunities in rural areas. So that gives you just, you and the audience, you panelists and the audience, just an overview of the TCCPA's recent position on the alcohol structures review. And so, yes, I'd like to now get the opinion and the views of the panelists. So perhaps if we could start with you, Bill Wiggin, MP. Do you have a view on how the alcohol structures duty review could favour cider makers going into the future?
I do, and I agree with a lot of what you said, and I thank you for that excellent presentation. Unfortunately, I don't do the negotiation on cider duty. The National Association of Cidermakers does that. And as a result, as a Member of Parliament, I have lobbied for the last 20 years for a reduction in cider duty, but it is an internal Treasury negotiation, which makes it slightly less political. However, we've had a lot of success in maintaining the level of duty on cider at a time, particularly recently, when the Exchequer has wanted to increase the amount of duty. We've also had battles over white cider, which has done tremendous harm to the image of cider. And we've also seen the end of the Brewers versus Cidermakers battle, largely through the acquisition of many cider makers by some of the big brewery companies. But certainly when I started out, that was a terrible waste of energy and conflict, particularly by Coors, who really had it in for cider, due to the substitution effect of people in pubs choosing to buy either a pint of lager or a pint of cider. The real problem for me is wine. And I've been discussing this with a variety of people, because 52% of our population is female, and yet when they go to the pub, they choose to buy a glass of wine rather than cider. And I think there's tremendous steps forward that can be taken in making our product more female friendly. Now, there's lots of people who love cider, but they don't necessarily feel the same effect that they do when they buy wine. And that may be because the calories are different. It may be because its PR is better. But when you look at what they pay in duty on a glass of wine, they're actually paying rather a lot. So a 175 milliliter glass of wine, still white wine, has a 52 pence, 52.07p duty, whereas your pint of average cider is only 22.95. So we've got a second dilemma in there, in that whilst I want more women to drink cider, actually from a tax point of view, they're paying through the nose to drink foreign wine. So there are a lot of dilemmas. The 7,000 litre limit is another one. I absolutely agree that instead of having a step, there should be a gradual increase from that level. And I would perhaps even concede, and I'd be interested to know what you think, that 7,000 litre could be, say, 5,000 litres if we got a graduated increase, because that extra 2,000 litres would bring money into the treasury, but it wouldn't cost anyone particularly large amounts of money, whereas the 7,001st litre is extremely expensive. I think you quoted £20,000. So I think everybody could win if we did this slightly differently.
Oh, and after such an eloquent expounding of his opinion, he decided to leave. Bill, are you there? Will you come back? I hope. Gordon, as chief of the National Association of Cidermakers, and I gather responsible for the negotiation with the Treasury on cider tax, perhaps you could give us the benefit of your thoughts on this matter.
Thank you. Yes, I was delighted to hear that that responsibility lies very, very firmly in my lap. Thank you, Tom. And actually, before I start, can I just also congratulate the three counties, yourself, Albert, and everyone who's managed to get this two-day session up and running. I think it's really well needed by the industry, and I know it's not easy to do. So I think you've all done a great job in getting so many people together who are passionate about the industry for 2 days. So thank you for that. Yeah, let me get a couple of comments. I think I'd like to contextualize what I'm about to say with a couple of comments. Firstly, you don't need me to tell you this, but the last year has been the most difficult, the most frustrating, and probably the most unsettling that any of us have ever seen. The cider industry has been particularly hard hit. So the cider industry has lost 1 million hectolitres of cider in 2020 versus what it sold in 2019. 1 million hectolitres, which is a huge, huge volume. And in cider, we have totally around 40% of Bill's back. Would you like to revert to Bill, Tom, and come back?
No, I think you carry on. You're doing a grand job there.
I'll let you carry on, Gordon. Yeah.
No problem.
Bill will have another chance.
Good job. Okay, so in cider, roughly 40% of our market is usually in the hospitality sector. And I know that for smaller ciders, many of you around this virtual table, the share of cider sold in the local pub or restaurant is actually much higher. And I'm acutely aware, as indeed as the National Association of Cidermakers, that too many of you have been disproportionately affected this last year. Tom made the point that cider is relatively a small drink in the UK marketplace. In fact, it's the smallest alcoholic drink sector in the UK marketplace. And we do generate approximately just under £300 million in revenue for the Treasury each year. This is a lot smaller than other sectors. So I believe, and members of the three county won't be surprised to hear me say this, I believe that it's critically important, therefore, that the industry does everything possible to protect the long-term future of cider and unites together to shout loudly with one strong voice. The NACM, I think you all know the NACM. We have 16 full members. We represent sort of 90% of the volume of cider that's sold in the UK, but we've proudly supported the issues facing smaller cider makers, such as three counties who are affiliated to us through the regional associations. And I'm very positive that in the last 2 years, we've made some real progress there. We've shouted loudly for much needed improvements to the duty system for years, and absolutely recognise that the 70 hectolitre exemption, whilst it's important, is not enough to stimulate growth and encourage investment and innovation for small businesses. I was going to quote Tom's survey because I received that a couple of years ago, and Tom's survey that he presented clearly illustrates the glass ceiling that just discourages and indeed prevents people from selling more than 70 hectolitres, or producing and selling more than 70 hectolitres a year. So broadly speaking, the NACM fully supports the position presented in the 3 county submission. And indeed, we presented similar views to the Exchequer Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, when we met with her before the budget. Our members, all cider makers, but our members are important to the rural economy. We support about 11,500 jobs and generate £24 million at farm gate pricing for the cider apples, which are harvested from around 17,000 acres of orchards. And as you know better than I do, those play a key part in the rural economy. And within many of your sites, you're attracting tourists. The cider industry attracts over 500,000 tourists into the rural economy each year. So we believe strongly that the current duty rates for cider, and I'll talk about sparkling cider in a moment, and 163, but they reflect the complexity of a supply chain that relies on fruit from orchards that take the best part of 10 years to mature and then produce, hopefully, a healthy crop for decades. Unlike some other alcoholic categories, our primary raw material comes in once a year for a few weeks to reference this, and then has to be stored for the next 12 months, requiring specialist equipment and obviously a large amount of space and investment in equipment. The duty rules, and I enjoyed your exposition of the history of duty, Tom. The duty rules currently are set firmly in the 70s. And looking back, I guess that I wouldn't suggest that this is an era either typical or a shining example of Great British cider making. And there's no question that the rule book needs reviewing, and we're genuinely grateful that the Treasury's launched the review into structures. So we've really focused on 3 main areas. The first one of those is fruit cider, and Tom talked about fruit cider briefly in terms of it currently attracting the same duty as made wine. So currently, we can find written records of fruit ciders going back 400 years, where cider makers would put fruits from hedgerows or even honey and other fruits into cider. Yet currently they are excluded from the rules which govern cider, i.e. Notice 162, and they form part of a sort of separate category which Tom described as made wine. It's called made wine. And also it's even more iniquitous because those of you that are making less than 70 hectolitres can't benefit from the duty exemption if you add in hedgerow fruit, crab, apples or quince. And those above 70 hectolitres actually have to register twice, once for cider and once for made wine, which adds red tape, bureaucracy, unnecessary complexity, as well as having to pay significantly higher duty rates, i.e. the rates that Bill referred to in that 175ml glass. So we believe, and we've really lobbied strongly and taken up Bill's challenge of being the chief negotiators for this. We have negotiated very strongly as part of our submission to better protect the heritage of cider, that these ciders should be recognised, defined and taxed appropriately. And I think I'd also add that recognising fruit ciders in that way allows those ciders to be regulated and defined through HMRC rules, which currently they're not. The next point I just want to make is about the diversity of the cider category, which is, it's incredibly diverse. And it is a key part of its charm and its success. And cider, as we all know, it can be very different drinks. It can be matched to such a wide range of consumer occasions. And I think, this is a challenge for the industry at times, that we should all welcome and encourage this diversity. And I believe, and the NACM believes, that promoting the widest range of ciders will support the long-term sustainability of the category And, you know, the great thing is that different ciders really do appeal to very different consumers. Craft ciders appeal to a cohort of consumers. Mainstream ciders appeal to a different cohort of consumers. And the point I would make, I guess, is, you know, it's something I've said before, and when I've addressed the 3 counties, is that a fine craft cider in a 75 centilitre bottle attracts a very different drinker to those drinking pints of cider in the local pub or buying cans in the supermarket. But they're all important to the cider category, and actually we should celebrate their differences and the choices that they make. Smaller ciders, which is, I guess, what we're really talking about today, often play a really important part in your rural communities. You attract tourists, you add character and interest to the range, stocked by your local shops and pubs, and protect standard orchards. However, for those looking to grow beyond the very local market, there's absolutely no incentive for encouragement to invest in your business. In fact, the current model penalises you when you produce only a couple of pints over the exemption levels, and Tom and Bill both make that point. And you would need to grow rapidly, more than tripling the size of your cider business before you can break even. So I personally believe, and the NACM believe, that the most stimulating way that we can help, or the biggest stimulant that we can provide to craft and small cider makers is to put in place a progressive cider duty system. And it's the only way to manage it in a fair and reasonable way. We've shouted loudly alongside all of you, and we really hope that the government will listen and make the necessary changes when they publish their findings. So probably the main body of the NACM response to the structures review was around progressive duty system.
Super.
I think I'd leave that at there, if that's okay.
That's more than enough. Thank you very much, Gordon. And then Barry, would you like to make any comments on what I said and what Gordon said?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you so much for inviting me along today. I wish this was in person and we could all gather around and enjoy a cider together, maybe another time. But just as a background, obviously, I'm from the Society of Independent Brewers, and we represent about 750 small independent brewers across the whole of the UK. And, you know, as many of you will know, we campaigned for many years for progressive beer duty, and which led to that introduction in 2002 of small breweries relief. And that's really transformed the brewing industry, and it's enabled new breweries to enter the market, to invest and to grow, to create all those local jobs and those opportunities. I think it's reconnected community, and importantly, it's vastly widened consumer choice. And I think there's a real opportunity now for small cider makers to seize the moment and convince the government to introduce a similar scheme for you. And I believe those stars may now be aligning for cider if a strong, coherent message can be put across the ministers. And I think there is a role for MPs in all of this as well, Bill, as well as trade associations in making that strong case. And I think those stars have aligned for 3 reasons, as I see it. I think, first of all, a clear barrier has been lifted. So we're no longer tied to the EU Structures Directive, which has prevented the government from expanding relief to cider makers in the past. And I think we've seen, obviously, that the government has been interested in this. So if we look back to the 2010 review of alcohol taxation, the government said it wanted to see a cider relief be allowed under EU rules, which allow them greater flexibility. So there's an interest there. And then, as you've all said, you know, it's a live issue. The Treasury is conducting this review at the moment, and it's considering extending relief to other categories, and also introducing a differential rate of duty on draft, which will be, also important for small producers. But I'm afraid, as I see it, as I see the direction of travel, I think the Treasury will want a sacrifice from you as well. And I think this will probably mean you have to give up the farm gate exemption and also accept a more equivalent level of duty to other drinks. You see that in the 2010 review previously, that they decided not to make any changes to those relative rates because they couldn't introduce a small cider relief scheme. That has now changed. And I think also that the Treasury seems to be really interested in the Australian model. So where in Australia, they've got different drinks categories can claim a return or a refund of 60% up to maximum value, and you have this differential rate of duty. That seems to be where they're really interested in. And we can always see that because recently they've been consulting on some technical changes to small brewers relief, and including those this idea of a cash cap. So you limit the amount that any small producer, any brewery in this case, can claim. And that means that you can easily expand that and include other categories as well. So that seems to be where they're actually exploring it. So I think there's some real opportunities for ciders, but I think there's going to be some sacrifice needed to get it. However, unlike Bill, I think the real challenge isn't from wine for us. I think it's from the spirits. And that's where the real danger comes for both of us, for beer and cider. Don't forget that this alcohol review resulted from going to visit some whiskey producers in Scotland. That's where it came out of. And that's the real pressure. They would like to see equivalents. And if they started to introduce that, that can mean, a 200% increase in duty for cider, 40% or more increase in beer duty. And those are the real threats. And that's why we've got a shared interest. And I think we need to work together to make sure that doesn't happen, but we have a fair outcome that works for all of us.
Thank you, Barry. Very interesting points made there, and thank you all for making those points. We still haven't seen Mr. Littlegranger, sadly, but we shall press on. Now, there have been some questions and some observations made. So I'll go to the first one. Susanna Mansfield asks, is the increase in tax for sparkling cider to do with historic reasons, i.e. funding the Napoleonic Wars or similar? What's the justification for it not ever having been lowered or brought into line? Well, I can tell you, Susanna, that in 1997, the tax on sparkling cider was increased from the equivalent rate for still cider to its current much higher rate by I believe, a Labour government. And then in 2002, a Labour government introduced the small brewers relief, which gave them a 50% discount on their production up to 500,000 litres per annum. And I don't think the increase in sparkling cider tax was anything to do with the Napoleonic Wars, but I'm sure that either Bill or Gordon or Barry will have an answer to that question. Does one of you want to indicate that you have an answer, would like to answer that? Gordon.
Yeah, it's slightly closer to Napoleon than you think, actually. I don't know the full detail, but it is very, very frustrating. And it's due to, and I don't know exactly when this took place, it's due to a long-standing court case that was instigated by the French champagne industry, which they won. And the Treasury aren't in a position to change sparkling cider duty without challenging this legal position, because we've challenged them on it several times. And this is actually something I discovered following my address to the three counties a couple of years ago. So it's slightly closer to Napoleon than you think.
So from without the European Union, we are still having our cider duty system influenced by the French. Is that really what you're saying, Mr. Johncox?
No, I don't know. What I know is that there was a legal ruling that was made some years ago in favour of the champagne industry, and before any change to duty can be made, that legal position would have to be challenged and reversed.
Gosh. Well, you learn something new every day, and that includes me. Thank you very much. I did want to go back to the discussion about pure juice and the seasonal nature of traditional cider making. One of the reasons why why cider makers feel that the 7,000 litre per annum sort of glass ceiling limit is iniquitous is because some of us, once we've been going for a few years, find ourselves being rung up in some years of good harvest and being told, oh, I've got an extra 10 tons of fruit that, could you make use of? Or I've got some spare fruit on my orchard here. And of course, a cider maker like myself, who's under the 7,000 limit, and I don't have any equipment to go beyond that, simply has to say, well, I'm terribly sorry, but I can't use this spare fruit this year because A, it would bring me in contravention of my duty exemption, and B, I don't have the kit. So, if you're able to create a duty system where it would allow for the seasonal and variable nature of apple harvests to be accounted for, so you could produce more in one year but less in the next without suffering a duty penalty, I think that would also potentially be helpful alongside a taper. And I suppose the other thing I'd like to say on behalf of all cider makers is that we are not in any way against paying duty. We all like to pay our fair share, but it does need to be a fair share. And you know, the sparkling cider duty is extremely high, and it is a real disincentive to expand one's business. So, Bill, do you have a view on that?
I think the politics of this is quite important. There are an awful lot of beer producers across the UK, rather sensibly spread from Burton outwards. Whereas with cider, we're much more regional. And I think, apart from myself, there are only 11 other MPs with cider makers in their constituency. And rather, as Gordon was saying, we're a very small alcohol producer. And we have suffered from terrible PR in the past. And we really do need to do a great deal more, I think, to not raise our profile, because actually everybody knows about cider. Most people love it. But in terms of the clout that we've talked about, actually, we're in a very good position, strangely, at the moment, because we've got some very good chaps in the Treasury. Jesse Norman, I've just seen Rishi is one, obviously he's the Chancellor, but you know, there are some cider supporters in amongst them. And this review, I'm very optimistic about, because everything you've said seems to me to be fair. Not greedy or aggressive, just fair. And therefore, I'm optimistic about the outcome of this review. It's something we've been asking for years. And now the Treasury has given so much money away through the furlough schemes and the various COVID-related handouts. You know, they do need to look very carefully at how they balance the books, where the money's going to come from, and how we encourage people like yourself, Tom, who've hit the 7,000 limit and are unwilling to invest to go beyond it because it just doesn't make sense. Well, you're the sort of people we want to encourage, because if we can do that, rather, as Barry was saying, we can get that knock-on effect. And I've seen little brewers popping up across my constituency, and they're great. So why can't we do the same for cider makers? I'm really positive about this, and I think that the Treasury will be too.
Oh, that's a wonderful news. Thank you, Bill. Good to hear so much optimism. I think I read a statistic that in the year 2000 there was around 500 breweries in the UK, and there's now over 2,000. So that's a fourfold increase in the brewing industry in 20 years. And if cider could do the same and become a massive success story, I'm sure we'd all be grateful. Gordon, do you have a view?
Yeah, I think in the discussions that we've had, and unfortunately most of those discussions have had to take place virtually, I found that the Treasury have been very, very receptive to the plight of the cider maker. The NACM has got some really good long-standing relationships in the Treasury, and actually, you know, Bill and other MPs with cider makers in their constituencies have been incredibly helpful. What we keep getting, the message that we keep getting back is around complexity, and the Treasury, I guess, and Bill will know far better than me, I think they genuinely do want to be progressive, and I think they do want to support us. They do not want to see this industry penalised any more than it has been. We present to them regularly the downward trend of cider for the last few years, and they are genuinely concerned about it. But they have this real challenge with complexity, and be that complexity of collection of duty or duty mechanisms. So what we've tried to do is to present something to them that is actually quite simple and quite straightforward, that we think will benefit the majority of cider makers, and in doing that, elicit their support. And I think if we're able to do that, I do believe that there is a genuine desire to try and support this industry. It's not all straightforward though, because there are, you know, we do butt up against headwinds, and there are other segments of the alcohol industry that you know would love to eat a little bit of our cake, and they believe that the way to do that is to call for duty harmonization. And the NACM for years and years and years, and actually, again, I know Bill has been very supportive of this, have really made it clear why cider, and it's the points we made earlier that you made, Tom, that I made as well, in terms of the way that cider is made, the additional cost of making cider, the length of time it takes to make, the fact you're dealing with raw materials that come in once a year, etc., what means that the segment warrants and deserves the treatment that it has. And then within that, what we have to do is protect and encourage more diversity and more growth. And I believe that we'll do that through the if the proposals that we put in place are supported, I really think we'll do it.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear you talk about complexity of duty, because of course taxing on production volume is really relatively simple. You say how much you produced and you pay the appropriate tax, whereas the poor old brewers have to have umpteen spreadsheets to figure out, exactly how much alcohol is in each recipe that they make up and sell, and it's according to the percentage alcohol by volume, of course. And that's probably perceived as a slightly more complex system. Barry, do you want to come back to any of those points?
Yeah. No, I'd like to. I think, as Gordon's just said there, some clear objectives that the government's got from this alcohol review. That's to simplify the system, make it more economic, rational, have fewer distortions, and reduce that administrative burden. So I think it might be a tough sell for cider to have a new duty category for seasonal pure juice cider. Although I think it's really important, I think it's a really important argument that you make, that it should be recognised. So I'm wondering, if there's a way, if there is a small cider relief, that it's recognised within that. So, those that put more juice into their ciders, up to 80 or 90%, or, like you guys do or more, should actually receive more support in some kind of relief. And that might be a way forward. Because, just going back to beer, what we've seen is that small brewers relief has allowed all that innovation, all that growth, all that diversity, which I think is really, really important for the sector and should be supported in cider. So now we've got, barrel-aged saisons and stouts, really interesting sours that our members are doing. Some of those, I know it's different, but, have a similar process whereby you're putting it in a barrel and you're aging it for 6 or 12 months. So it becomes an annual product as well. And all of that has enabled them to do it because of small brewers relief. So if we can get into a similar situation for that for cider, I think that'd be fantastic. It'd be great for the industry.
Thank you. Alistair Morell asks, what would it take to challenge the law on sparkling cider duty? And also, does Brexit offer us a unique opportunity to create a new landscape for ciders, perries and fruit wines using a reformed tax regime as a springboard for UK consumer support and strong export markets? I can imagine what Bill might say. Bill?
Yes, it does. But I think it really, unfortunately, my enthusiasm is capped by the fact that the Treasury is doing this review, and therefore, the work in progress has to finish its journey through the Treasury sausage machine before we actually find out what they're concluding. Sorry, there's a lot of mixed metaphors in there, but I think you understand. They're not going to think again about this until they finish the research they're doing at the moment. I've just been noticing on the chats, I was challenged on the number of MPs with Cidermakers in their patch. The NACM said there's roughly about a dozen, that was 11 including me. And my message to you today is, if your MP isn't a member of the all-party group, please ask them to join, because I spend a lot of time fighting cider battles and it's fairly lonely. Even my friend Ian hasn't turned up today. There's only a few of us, and we need to do what the beer guys do. The beer lobby is very, very strong. It's very well organized, very well funded. It's powerful. It's incredibly nice to its supporters. It has prizes for the best beer drinker of the year. It does a lot of PR, and when it comes down to it, that decision that people make just before they order their drink, it's all in their minds. And the PR that we've seen work so well, and advertising obviously for cider when the Magners Ice campaign happened, we can make a difference to consumption, and if we do that, then we all win. Because people will find that these small cider makers make equally or even more delicious cider, but at a different time in the day or in their lives when they choose to buy it. So, we all win together. So I'm very keen that you encourage your members of Parliament, if they're not in Herefordshire, to get involved, because it's not a nasty thing to do. It's really a great product. So please spread the word.
Thank you, Bill. It's refreshing to hear a Conservative MP talk so openly about lobbying. Gordon, do you have a position on?
I will go back on sparkling cider. I'm not a legal expert. I will go back and ask the question whether or not we're now whether we now are not a part of the EU. Does that give us an opportunity or the Treasury an opportunity to revisit the sparkling cider duty? Because on the face of it, it does look absurd, and it clearly is. What I've been told is it's all about this legal issue. But I will go back and challenge that, and perhaps we'll see if they've got any appetite. Well, they won't have an appetite to do that, I'm sure. But whether there's an appetite around the industry to do so, I think we'll just dig out a bit more information about it, Tom.
That'd be wonderful, Gordon. Thank you. I think it's fair to say that there is certainly an appetite around the industry at the smaller end that we represent to try and right some of these wrongs, because it really is perceived as highly iniquitous. Barry, do you have any position on that, or?
Well, on the sparkling side, I think sparkling wines are the most heavily taxed category, if I'm correct, and obviously this is yet again a barrier to innovation. I think we'd all like to see a growth of different products and offer a greater variety of sparkling ciders for people. So, anything we can do to change that, I think should be encouraged, and we should challenge that. But going back to, I think the original question was about the opportunities now we've left the EU, and as I said in my opening arguments. Views that now outside that structures directive, it does open up those opportunities. So we can now have a small cider relief scheme. Yeah. We can have this differential rate of duty, which is really interesting if they go through with it as well. So that would mean that the beer that's put into certain cups, containers, casks, and kegs sold into pubs will have a lower rate of duty than, say, those in cans and bottles, encouraging more people to visit the pub. It can only be a good thing, because that's a safe and controlled environment to enjoy alcohol with your friends in the local community, and so it should be really encouraged. So I'm hopeful that we're going to get some movement on that, and I think that also should be applied to cider as well as beer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Barry, so we're getting, I'm afraid, towards the end of this session. It's gone extraordinarily quickly, but I did want to ask all of you your opinions on the following question, which is, what can a cider maker like me do to best effect change in the duty system? What should we do? Should we write to our MPs? Should we march on central London? Any tips?
Don't march on central London. I have the misfortune of going to London and to do my job, and I would definitely encourage you to stay at home in your orchards, which are much more agreeable places. However, the carrot works better than the stick, and so definitely in this case. And so just nice letters to your MPs, emails are perfectly agreeable. Just saying, I'm a cider maker. I really think that the government would benefit from, reducing the pressure on my ability to grow my business. This is something that will help the Exchequer, help our country, help me, and encourage people to drink British. What's not to like about that? And my colleagues are of that mindset. They want agreeable, and they want wins, and they want to see the right thing being done. And I think it doesn't matter which party they're in, that applies to all of them. So any gentle nudge in the right direction will be great. And don't throw rotten apples at the Treasury. I got that one in the chat. It's a waste of your apples. You should be pressing them. And the point really, I think, is that we want people to want to drink cider. So we shouldn't ever be seen as the bad guys. This is all positive. We have these beautiful orchards. We have a great product. We have Gabe going around selling cider across the spectrum. We've got some really great stories to tell. Don't spoil them by chucking apples. Big up what you're really good at, which is that you're lovely people doing a wonderful job. And I think you'll find that the political spectrum wants to follow that. That's what we'd like to be too. So come on, just drop them a line.
All right, thank you, Bill. I shall get my writing paper out after this session. Gordon.
I'm with Bill. I think for me it's at two levels. So there's when these consultations come out, and there's consultations at the moment about packaging waste, deposit return schemes, things that sound really boring, but actually really potentially impact this industry. And I would urge everybody, it doesn't matter how small you are or what you do, to contribute to those consultations, because numbers matter. And the more people that respond to a consultation, the more notice is taken of it. And what the NACM at the moment are providing, in the process of providing templates that make it very easy, so you top and tail it and send stuff in. So I think on a sort of professional level, that's what I would urge everybody please to do. Now, the point that Ben's, the point, I'm reading an email from Ben, the point I agree with you, Ben, by the way, the point that Bill's making, I completely agree with. Where we've had the most impact with influencers, be they members of parliament, members of the treasury, or whatever, is when we get them out to your orchards and we walk through the orchards and they see the passion of the cider maker, they taste the product, and I've never
That's very
ever
important.
It's very important. I've never been in a situation where an influencer has gone away from an orchard visit saying anything other than, I really want to help this industry. I really want to support this industry. You've all got much more than I think at times you realize, and we should use that. And please invite and use the NACM, use the 3 counties. I saw somebody earlier said that Rishi Sunak was there, a member of parliament, and they make cider. Well, write to Rishi Sunak, get him to your plant, get him to your orchard, and invite the NACM or invite the 3 counties or whoever along as well, because we can support that. And I really believe that will galvanize as much support as anything. And we have got a small cohort of members of parliament that represent cider at the moment. I'm going to check whether it should be more, but that group, including Bill, are really important to the industry and have done a really good job in the corridors of power, just having those corridor conversations that you can only have if you've been out, seen an orchard, tasted cider, and met the people that make it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gordon. Now, Barry, SIBA has had long history of success at lobbying the Treasury to get its tax wishes enacted. So what tips have you got?
Well, I mean, I think there's 3 elements to this, really, to be successful. I think one is persistence. It takes time. It took us a long time to get SBR. And I think it got to a stage where MPs, civil servants and others were pretty fed up of meeting with us about it, because it was so persistent with it. I think secondly, it's about clear messaging and arguments. So why you want it, what you're going to do with it. So you put the arguments why you want it, so you can grow, so you can create all those jobs, why you need it, and because of all the kind of market access issues that help to address those. And then thirdly, I think it's all about, you need that support. You need that support amongst MPs, officials and other organisations such as Canberra. And so, all the things that Gordon and Bill have just talked about, writing to your MP, getting them along, showing it, having events in Parliament, encouraging them to have debates, ask parliamentary questions. All of those activities really are important. And I think, that this is the time to be making those arguments now, as they start to make some decisions on this alcohol review. I think we're going to see something in the next few weeks and months on the next stages of that, and I think this is a crucial time. But I also just wanted to quickly pick up on the points that Gordon was just saying there about the future threats, and I think this is a real element for cider, and we've just got to be aware of it. So he talks about the deposit return scheme. That's going to be huge, absolutely humongous. I mean, what we're seeing, that's going to be introduced in Scotland next year, and the producer fee alone is just one element. It's going to be 6% of duty. So that's an equivalent of 6% of duty on beer. It's £200 million a year that it's going to have to pay. In addition to that, you've got the labelling changes and everything else. So that's huge. And then we're going to be consulting now on calorie content and putting CMO labels on bottles and cans, and that's going to start next month. So all these things are coming, and all big changes, and the industry has got to be prepared for these. And those also strengthen your case for why you need additional support in the alcohol review, I think.
Yes, that's a very interesting point, Barry. Thank you. As a business that barely turns over the VAT threshold, the idea of having to install specialist equipment to take back bottles for reuse.
No, they're not reused, Tom.
They're not.
It's not a reusable scheme.
No.
No, it's not a reusable scheme.
It's a deposit recycling scheme.
It's a recycling scheme. It's a glorified scheme. If you reuse, it's outside the scheme.
Gosh, that really is almost pointless, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway,
reuse them. Then you have to pay.
Well, quite. There's a lot to be said for reuse, but again, it's capital investment and so on. When you've got a small business that is limited not artificially to the 7,000 litres, it is difficult to make these decisions sensibly. Anyway, unfortunately we've come, I think, to the end of the session. And the next session, 3:45 p.m. networking starts. So if you'd like to stay on and talk, please do. But if you have somewhere else to go and would like to network with other cider makers, then thank you very much for joining. I hope you found it an interesting session. I do want to just answer one point in the chat from Ben Thompson, which is, he asks, maybe the TCCPA could provide a guide with the key points we want to see in duty reform. So that we can all be singing from the same hymn sheet. Yes, Ben, you're right. The TCCPA has got an executive summary of its submission to the Alcohol Structures Review, and we probably need to publish that on our website so that everyone can download it and use it when writing to their MPs. And to thank also all of our panelists, Barry Watts, Gordon Johncox, and Bill Wiggin MP. Thank you all for coming to today's event and supporting the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association, and for giving us the benefit of your experience and wisdom in dealing with the Treasury and negotiating duty changes. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. I wish I could get the hall to give you a round of applause that you could hear, but unfortunately in this time of love and pestilence, we just have to accept the thanks. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
How did it go? I watched the